Welcome to Tomorrow Unveiled, your essential guide to the seismic shifts rocking the global energy landscape.
This week, we are taking on a really high-stakes topic, one we're calling green code, hot core.
And the idea here, the central premise, is that the global energy transition is no longer just about deciding if we switch to clean energy.
No, not at all.
It's now a much tougher question of how we actually achieve stability, security, and just raw power in a world that's getting more complex by the day.
That tension you just mentioned, that is the single defining characteristic of the energy market in the 2020s. I mean, based on all the material compiled by our dedicated research team, we're seeing a kind of perfect storm developing.
A perfect storm, how so?
Well, you have this urgent societal mandate to cut emissions, which is absolutely necessary.
Right.
But it's colliding, and I mean head-on, with unprecedented growth in demand for electricity.
And that's being driven by the AI age, right? All the data centers, the computing power.
Exactly. And all of this is happening against a backdrop of, well, really fragile supply chains and a lot of geopolitical instability. It's a very tense situation.
It sounds like a multivariable problem, which is why just saying let's install more solar or build more wind turbines feels like an incomplete answer now.
It's a completely inadequate answer.
So the mission for Tomorrow Unveiled today is to synthesize a pretty massive stack of data our team has pulled together. We're focusing on three core areas that really define this collision.
That's right.
First, we're going to examine the, frankly, shocking consolidation that's happening among major power producers. We're talking about the creation of genuine energy supergiants.
And second, we'll dig into a fascinating and, slightly concerning real-world case study. We're looking at a highly renewable grid to see the kind of stability issues that can pop up.
And the third area?
The third area, and this is maybe the most important, is the intense, often hidden geopolitical and social battleground that's being fought for foundational fuels like uranium and for all the critical minerals you need for every battery, every EV, every electric motor.
Okay, so what's the ultimate takeaway here? What is the core insight of green code, hot core, for Tomorrow Unveiled?
Well, the key insight from all the material is that solving this green code is...
Yes.
It's far less about waiting for some magical technological breakthrough, and it's far more about mastering the really hard stuff, infrastructure, ensuring long-term system stability, and critically navigating the incredibly complex political dynamics that decide who gets what resources and at what price.
So we need to look past the shiny new tech.
Exactly. We need to focus on the messy business of actually deploying it and managing all the risks that come with it.
That sets the stage beautifully for the sheer scale of what we're seeing. Let's jump right in. We're talking about the dawn of energy supergiants, driven by this massive corporate consolidation and, of course, the demands of the AI age.
We really have to start with the scale, because it's hard to wrap your head around. Our research team pointed to one pivotal transaction announced on January 7th, 2026.
Okay.
That's when Constellation officially completed its acquisition of Calpine Corporation. And this wasn't just another utility merger.
No. This created the single largest producer of electricity in the entire nation.
The largest. By a significant margin.
That sounds less like a simple merger and more like, I don't know, a carefully crafted chess move to completely dominate the modern grid.
That's a great way to put it.
So when we talk about that scale, we need a number. What does that total combined capacity actually look like? And why does that number make this new entity so uniquely powerful right now?
Okay, so the new company now commands this enormous fleet with a total generating capacity reaching 55 gigawatts.
55 GW.
55 gigawatts. And to put that number in perspective for you, that is more power than many industrialized nations consume in total. But as you pointed out, the key isn't just the sheer size of it. It's the composition of that fleet. It's the deliberate, strategic design behind it all.
So how does that combined fleet function strategically? What's the secret sauce?
Well, Constellation brought its huge portfolio of large zero-emission nuclear assets to the table.
Right, the classic baseload providers.
Exactly. They run 247, they're incredibly reliable, and crucially, they are zero carbon. So they paired this foundation with Calpine's significant and highly flexible natural gas and geothermal generation.
So it's an integrated strategy. You own the rock-solid foundation, but you also own the flexibility.
That's it. You've got both.
I understand the logic. The zero-emission nuclear core gives you that essential carbon-free base. But sometimes isn't relying on flexible gas for stability, even if it's a smaller part of the fleet, fundamentally counterproductive to the long-term goal of decarbonization?
That's a fair question, and it's one a lot of people are asking. The answer, at least according to the strategy here, is reliability in the near to midterm. Those gas and geothermal assets provide the flexible, dispatchable power that you absolutely need to manage hourly swings in demand or to cover maintenance outages at the nuclear plant.
Or to back up intermittent renewables when they eventually add them.
Precisely, to firm up future intermittent renewables. The material from our team clearly highlights that this structure is explicitly designed to meet surging national demand.
And specifically for those high-growth sectors.
Yes, the ones that require unwavering, 247, what we call firm power.
And what are those specific economic drivers? Which sectors are pushing for this kind of capacity that really only a 55-gigawatt giant can reliably provide?
We're talking about the critical infrastructure that is literally defining the AI age. This means hyperscale data centers.
Which are just unbelievably power-hungry.
They are insatiable. Then you have new advanced manufacturing facilities and other critical infrastructure. And, these sectors, they are not interested in power that is sometimes cheap.
No, they need power that is always available.
Always. And they need it delivered at a massive scale that you just can't reliably source from a decentralized fleet of intermittent sources on its own.
So the leadership of this new company,
Yeah.
they're explicitly saying this is about powering the next wave of the economy.
Yes. They've stated they're positioning themselves to power America's next wave of economic growth and, maintain global technological leadership.
So the message from the research is really that the race to dominate the AI economy is, in a way, fundamentally driving the consolidation of zero-carbon baseload power.
Precisely. This whole business model is about selling certainty to the fastest-growing consumers of energy on the planet. And to sell certainty, you have to have assets that can run rain or shine, day or night.
And beyond just managing the existing assets, this merger also created a massive centralized platform for scaling up emerging clean technologies.
It did.
What specific technologies are they focusing on to justify this claim of being a clean technology platform?
Well, the sheer capital and the operational footprint they have now allows them to de-risk investments in technologies that, frankly, smaller firms would just struggle to fund.
Sure, they can't afford the gamble.
Right. So the focus is on next-generation solutions, things like advanced nuclear designs, including small modular reactors or SMRs.
We're hearing a lot about those.
We are. And also an aggressive expansion of geothermal capacity, which, as we're going to discuss, is one of the most reliable forms of clean baseload power there is.
And I imagine carbon capture is in there too.
Absolutely. Major investments in carbon capture and sequestration, leveraging their existing natural gas fleet to make it cleaner while it's still needed in this interim period.
And long-duration storage is obviously key too. You can't talk about the future grid without it.
It's essential. This merger has basically created the largest vertically integrated clean energy toolkit in the nation overnight.
So they can experiment.
They can experiment and scale up long-duration energy storage technologies much, much faster than a bunch of disparate regional utilities ever could.
So this consolidation, it suggests that the answer to these massive decarbonized power demands is going to come from these highly diversified zero-carbon giants.
I think that's the bet they're making.
Yeah.
That they can leverage those huge balance sheets and their very diverse asset portfolios to solve the puzzle.
It definitely indicates that scale and that portfolio diversity, the mix of nuclear, geothermal, flexible gas, that it acts as a critical defense against the instability and the volatility that we're seeing everywhere else in the energy transition.
Yeah, when you have nuclear, geothermal, and flexible gas assets all under one roof, your risk profile for meeting peak demand just drops dramatically.
Okay, so let's pivot. Let's go from the corporate strategy of building stability here in the U.S. to a real-world, highly renewable system that is currently experiencing the exact opposite, a profound crisis of stability and supply security. We're looking at comprehensive data analyzed by our dedicated research team concerning New Zealand's energy system, and it provides a critical case study in instability.
And, New Zealand is globally renowned for its high renewable penetration.
It is. It's often held up as a model.
A model, exactly. It draws heavily on abundant hydro and geothermal resources. But the research team's analysis really illuminates the hidden risks that emerge when an otherwise highly renewable system moves away from its foundational fossil fuels too quickly.
Without having the replacement firming capacity ready to go.
Exactly. Without that in place, it's the ultimate renewable paradox.
And the primary culprit, as noted in the material, is the rapid collapse of their domestic gas supply. How steep is this decline? What does it look like going forward?
The decline is severe, and it's structural. It's not just a blip. Domestic gas production has dropped by 45% over the last 6 years alone.
45%. That's a huge drop.
It's massive. But the real alarm bell is the forecast. The data suggests it is likely to have again in just the next 5 years.
Wow.
And this exposes these profound weaknesses in their energy security and affordability because the system has been too slow to replace that lost flexibility.
And this vulnerability, it's compounded by a major structural flaw. The complete lack of liquefied natural gas or LNG import capability. Why is that specific detail so critical for a modern energy system?
It's critical because without LNG import infrastructure, the entire system is 100% reliant on that single, rapidly diminishing domestic supply line.
There's no backup.
No backup at all. So when that domestic supply gets tight, which happens often, especially during dry years that limit their hydro generation, the security of the entire grid and the affordability for all consumers is just stretched to the breaking point.
There's no international backstop.
None. Which means the system has no ceiling on price volatility during a crisis. The price can just keep going up.
Okay, let's talk about a counterintuitive data point here that often shocks people. Gas generation makes up less than 10% of New Zealand's total electricity supply.
Tiny fraction.
A very small amount.
Yet the analysis suggests this tiny percentage holds the entire wholesale market hostage. How does that happen?
It happens purely because of its role as the marginal price setter. Explain that for us.
Okay, so imagine a supply curve. Most of the power, the hydro, the geothermal, the wind, it's really cheap to run, so it gets used first.
Right.
But when the grid needs just that last little bit of power to meet peak demand, the gas generator is almost always the last one brought online because it's flexible and it's fast.
Okay, it can ramp up quickly.
Very quickly. And that last, most expensive unit of power, the marginal generator, it dictates the market clearing price for all the electricity sold during that period.
So even though 90% of the power is clean and cheap, the analysis confirms that this expensive gas generation is dictating the wholesale electricity price in astonishing 70 to 90% of the time.
70 to 90% of the time. It's a massive driver of volatility and cost for everyone in the system.
So the scarcity of that domestic gas translates directly into these huge price swings.
Huge. And it impacts everyone, not just the people using gas directly. And this volatility is, well, it's staggering when you look at the price increase. Domestic gas, which used to trade around $7 per gigajoule, or GJ, back in the 2000s.
Okay.
It's now being traded domestically at $16 to $18 per GJ.
That's more than double the historic cost.
More than double, and that feeds directly into the electricity prices that everyone pays.
This brings us to the real-world economic damage. The research team calls it the deindustrialization risk. And this isn't just a theory, is it? This is industry actually folding because energy costs are too high and too unpredictable.
It is demand destruction in action. It's happening right now. High and volatile energy costs make certain energy-intensive industries non-competitive on the global stage.
So they're first to cut back.
They're forced to reduce production or, in some cases, exit the market entirely. The material provides some really stark examples.
Like what?
The pulp and paper industry saw a 41% reduction in export volumes between 2020 and 2025.
41%.
Yeah, driven by mill closures. Metals and mining also saw a substantial 14% drop in their contribution to GDP.
That is a significant chunk of a national economy just lost because of energy instability. And what about the future clean industries, the ones they want to attract? The research team broke down the operating expense ratios for those, and the figures are truly eye-opening.
They are. They show that these industries are highly exposed to this volatility. For new, low-carbon sectors that rely heavily on consistent, cheap, power-like sustainable aviation fuels or SAF manufacturing.
Right.
For them, energy costs can represent 50 to 80% of their total operating expenses.
50 to 80%.
And for hydrogen electrolysis, another key future industry, it's 20 to 40%.
Wait a second. If the marginal cost of electricity is being set by expensive volatile domestic gas 9 times out of 10, how can these future high-value clean industries possibly establish themselves competitively?
Well, the short answer is they can't.
The numbers don't work.
The numbers just don't work. The volatility creates this massive uncertainty for any long-term investor. And here's the paradox. New Zealand has a massive competitive advantage in its clean hydro and geothermal power.
A huge one.
But the lack of security around that small marginal percentage of thermal generation is actively driving away the very clean, energy-intensive industries they need to build their future economy on. It's a crisis of reliability.
This moves us seamlessly into the next section, which analyzes the solution. We need a blueprint for truly firmed renewable power, a way to leverage those unique assets to finally overcome this gas dependency.
Right. And to stabilize the system, the blueprint our research team looked at relies on two key resources that New Zealand already has. They just have to be used in fundamentally new ways.
Okay, let's start with the most reliable one, the hot core aspect of what we're talking about today.
That's geothermal energy. Unlike wind or solar, geothermal is not intermittent, it's always on. It taps into the Earth's heat to provide reliable, inherently firmed 247 baseload generation. This resource is absolutely essential because it guarantees a minimum level of supply regardless of the weather or the season.
It's a true foundational asset.
It is, and it must be maximized.
And then we have the other massive asset, hydroflexibility. Hydropower accounts for, what, well over half the current electricity supply?
Between 55 and 60%, yes.
So how does its role in managing the system need to change?
Well, traditionally, hydro has often been run as baseload, just generating a steady stream of power.
Right.
But as you integrate more intermittent sources like wind and solar, the function of those massive lakes and reservoirs has to shift. It has to move away from being baseload to providing flexible firming.
So you're saying, think of the hydro system as the nation's largest battery.
That's the perfect analogy. It stores water during periods of excess generation when the sun is shining or the wind is howling, and then it releases that water precisely when the wind drops, the sun sets, or demand peaks.
This is a huge conceptual change in how you manage a grid. You're moving from just consistent generation to acting as a system-level dispatchable battery.
Yes.
Which is what makes intermittent renewables manageable in the first place.
Exactly. This combination of deep geothermal baseload and flexible hydro is the core mechanism for creating a consistent, firmed, low-carbon system. But, and this is a big but, to make this work, the build-out of new renewable capacity has to happen at a relentless pace.
And what pace of build-out is required, according to the analysis? And what happens if they miss that target?
The research highlights a critical, urgent need. The system has to maintain its current rapid build rate. The projection is that up to 1.4 terawatt hours, that's TWU of new supply, must be commissioned every single year out to 2035.
Every single year. And if they miss that target?
If they miss it, the thermal generation can't be displaced, and the grid remains vulnerable to all those price shocks we were just talking about.
So why that specific number, 1.4 TWHs per year? Why is that so crucial?
It's necessary because you're trying to meet a double challenge. One, you have the sheer demand from electrification. Charging EVs, converting industrial process heat, and yes, powering new data centers. And two, that new generation has to be enough to displace the remaining thermal generation entirely.
Which allows them to finally retire that volatile gas fleet.
And eliminate the marginal price setter problem for good. If they slow down, they fail on both of those objectives.
That kind of aggressive pace, though, it necessitates rapid regulatory movement, which is often the biggest bottleneck for energy projects anywhere in the world.
It is the single biggest threat to the timeline. To avoid a project backlog that stalls this whole transition, successful deployment relies heavily on fast-track consenting legislation. The analysis points out that reforms like the Fast Track Approvals Act of 2024 are absolutely crucial to ensure timely, predictable approvals.
Can you give us a concrete example of that regulatory friction they're trying to solve?
Certainly. The research documented some early experiences where, even under interim expedited pathways, a substantive application for a major project like the Glorit Solar Farm took almost 2 years just to get consent.
2 years. And you need 1.4 TWO of new power per year.
Exactly. Multi-year consent timelines are just fundamentally incompatible with the energy transition timeline. These reforms need to ensure that the current project pipeline, which is actually quite robust, converts into a steady, commissioned flow of power generation, not just a list of projects waiting for a stamp.
Okay, this brings us to affordability. This is the most sensitive part of the energy equation for the public.
Always.
If they're building so many of these cheap, low marginal cost renewables, is the cost of power going down for everyone?
That is the good news for the system as a whole. Based on the modeling our research team analyzed, wholesale electricity prices are forecast to decline across all scenarios out to 2035.
So as that volume of cheap renewables increases,
The expensive gas generators are simply brought online less frequently, which reduces the average market clearing price. That is a massive long-term economic win.
Okay, so a win for industry and for long-term economic stability. But you mentioned there's a significant caveat for the residential consumer.
There is.
What are they facing, and what's driving up their bills?
This is where the cost of modernizing the infrastructure really hits home. Residential consumers are likely to see price increases, potentially quite sharp ones, all the way up until 2030.
And this isn't due to the cost of generation.
No, it's almost entirely due to rising transmission and distribution charges, what most of us just call lines charges.
And lines charges already make up a huge percentage of the average household bill, don't they?
A staggering amount. They represent about 35 to 45% of the final household bill.
And how much are these essential infrastructure upgrades, the cost of modernizing the grid for the future forecast to increase that portion of the bill?
Well, the regulated revenue increments for these necessary upgrades are already locked in. They are forecast to increase by 25 to 35% in real terms before 2030.
Wow.
And this investment, it's non-negotiable. It's what's needed to modernize the grid, to handle two-way power flow, manage distributed generation, and connect that massive influx of EVs and industrial heat pumps.
This is such a critical point for anyone watching the energy transition globally. You're basically saying that cheap renewable generation is only half the story.
That's right.
The cost of moving that power efficiently and reliably to your home is going up sharply in the near term, even while the cost of producing it is falling.
That's the friction point.
And why is that specific residential consumer friction so difficult for policymakers to manage?
Because the political difficulty is just immense. Consumers are being asked to pay significantly more upfront for a promise of cheaper, cleaner, more reliable energy later on.
Right. The cost is immediate and tangible. It's right there on their monthly bill.
And the resulting benefits: cheaper wholesale power, a more resilient grid. They feel delayed and intangible. Successfully navigating this transition requires really clear and careful communication to manage that friction, to explain why these infrastructure costs, which are often invisible, are fundamentally necessary for the benefits they'll eventually see.
It's an investment, but it feels like a cost.
It feels like a cost to the consumer right now, and that can create a lot of political backlash.
And that's a good place for us to pause and connect with you, our listeners. We love hearing your thoughts. Whether you're on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, leave a comment and let us know what you think about this. Are you seeing the intersection of high renewable generation and domestic gas shortages where you live? How are those lines charges affecting you?
And if you're listening on a podcast service like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a rating and review for Tomorrow Unveiled. It truly helps us reach new listeners.
That necessary grid investment brings us squarely into the security concerns. The system may be getting cheaper on the wholesale side, but it is deeply fragile right now. Let's move on to securing the system and bridging what the research team calls the missing middle of flexible power.
Okay.
We've established the system is heavily reliant on hydro. So what is the maximum unthinkable risk scenario that grid operators and policymakers have to prepare for?
The extreme risk scenario is defined by a worst-case occurrence: consecutive dry and windless periods.
So a double whammy.
A double whammy. Historically, a typical dry year results in about a 2 TWh reduction in hydro generation. But when you couple that with sustained low wind periods, the research shows the system could face a staggering 4 TWh generation deficit.
4 terawatt hours. That is a truly catastrophic shortfall.
It's a grid-breaking scenario.
And what does the current energy security buffer look like when you put it up against that 4 TWh threat?
It looks inadequate. The current security reserves are just not enough. We're talking about solid fuel stockpiles and the existing gas storage capacity, which is primarily at a facility called a HUROA.
Okay.
In total, those reserves equate to roughly 3.1 TWh.
So that's enough to cover a typical dry year.
It is, but it leaves a 0.9 TWh shortfall in that maximum worst-case scenario, almost a full terawatt hour short.
So if the worst dry and windless period hits, they would be forced to rely on drastic measures. Specifically what the research calls demand response from large industrial users.
That's right. They would literally have to pay major industries like the TY aluminum smelter or large chemical plants to curtail or shut down their power usage entirely.
But relying on these users to save the grid is incredibly risky, isn't it? Especially since high prices are already driving some of them toward the exit.
It's not a robust or long-term strategy for security. It's a desperate measure. It's a sign of a system under extreme stress.
So immediate coordinated action is needed to stabilize that volatile gas market and provide the security cushion the grid needs. What are the three critical security levers outlined by the dedicated research team to achieve this?
The research team outlined 3 coordinated actions that really must be taken simultaneously to ensure stability between now and 2030.
Let's start with lever one, targeted supply maintenance.
First, slow supply decline. This means actively prioritizing targeted development drilling in existing gas fields to ensure that near-term supply. This is vital because if those development wells aren't drilled soon, any late-arriving volumes of gas risk missing the crucial pinch period entirely.
So you have to act now.
Right now. And crucially, this lever also includes examining advanced CO2 scrubbing technology to unlock high CO2 content gas from fields that are currently uneconomic or shut in.
Why is unlocking that high CO2 gas so vital? And what's the cost that comes with that technology?
It's vital because it unlocks near-term domestic supply that is otherwise stranded, just sitting in the ground. However, it requires a significant capital intervention.
It's not cheap.
No. Unlocking these high CO2 fields, like one called Chimero, would likely require an investment of around $200 million per facility for new modular scrubbing units or transport infrastructure to get it to existing scrubbing plants.
$200 million.
Per facility. This is a costly measure, potentially totaling hundreds of millions, but it's seen as absolutely vital to extending the useful life of domestic supply and bridging that stability gap.
$200 million to unlock a temporary domestic bridge fuel. That just shows the urgency of the security threat. Okay, what is the second lever, the one focused on storage?
Second, double gas storage. The current gas storage at Ahuroa provides about 0.8 TWh equivalent capacity. The research indicates this needs to be significantly increased. The target is 8 petajoules, or PJ, which is equivalent to 1.6 TWh of capacity.
So why does storage need to double? What does that get you?
It dramatically increases the system's resilience. More storage allows the system to better manage seasonal variability. You can stock up in summer when demand is lower. And crucially, it helps mitigate that severe dry year risk when your hydro resources are depleted.
It's a shock absorber.
It's the necessary shock absorption for the electricity system, especially in those peak winter periods.
And the third lever deals with the expensive but necessary international backstop.
Third, prepare LNG optionality. Now look, no one wants to build a dependency on imported fossil fuels, but the research treats LNG as a crucial security backstop.
An insurance policy.
Exactly. The marginal cost of LNG imports is estimated at $22 to $25 per GJ.
Okay, now let's compare that to the historic $7 price, or even the current $16 to $18 domestic price.
It is significantly more expensive.
I understand the economic reluctance, but what is the true value of that $25 per GJ price tag? That marginal cost of your ultimate insurance policy is potentially 3 times what they were paying in the 2000s.
It is. The value is entirely in the insurance, not the fuel itself. LNG provides essential supply diversification, and most importantly, it places a hard cap on extreme price volatility.
Right, without it, in a crisis, prices could just skyrocket to ruinous levels.
And cause massive economic harm and irreversible industrial exits. Having LNG optionality buys time for the clean transition to be completed in an orderly rather than a catastrophic fashion. If LNG is delayed beyond 2028, or if domestic supply keeps falling sharply, that crucial security mechanism is lost.
Okay, moving to the demand side. How can industry reduce its reliance on gas to help alleviate some of this supply pressure?
That's the accelerating fuel switching lever. The goal here is to aggressively convert industrial thermal demand, which is used primarily for process heat, from gas to electricity or, where it's viable, to biomass.
Okay.
The research team identified a major opportunity to transition 17.3 PJ of industrial gas demand by 2030, with big targets in food processing, particularly dairy and meat operations.
Getting the dairy and meat processing industries to move from gas boilers to electric or biomass boilers, that's a massive piece of the decarbonization puzzle, isn't it?
It's huge, but biomass comes with its own set of supply chain challenges.
It does. There's a classic chicken and egg problem.
A total chicken and egg problem. Industrial buyers want long-term biomass contracts to justify their investment in new boilers, but the local suppliers are hesitant to invest in large-scale infrastructure like pelletization facilities and logistics without that guaranteed long-term high-volume demand.
So how does the research suggest breaking that deadlock?
With a pragmatic, short-term solution, Biomass imports.
Interesting.
Near-term biomass imports, for example, high-quality white pellets from Vietnam, priced competitively at around 14 to 15 NZ dollars per GJ, can signal immediate, robust demand to the market.
So this temporary import signal provides domestic producers with the financial confidence they need to scale up their own operations.
Exactly. To scale up and mature the domestic biomass infrastructure. It's an international kickstarter for a domestic industry.
That is a clever use of global trade dynamics to solve a local infrastructure bottleneck. Now let's talk about that missing middle capacity, that necessary bridge between short-duration batteries and the slow, steady baseload. The research team highlighted an innovative approach: battery solid fuel pairing.
Yeah, this is a great example of maximizing the assets you already have. We are talking about pairing high-speed battery storage with traditional, long-duration solid fuel plants, like the older Rankine units you find at sites like Huntley.
And solid fuel plants are effective for long-duration energy, but they're notoriously slow and inflexible. They take forever to ramp up and down.
Exactly. And this inflexibility traditionally meant you needed a highly flexible gas generator to handle the instantaneous power injection required during those ramp-ups, or to quickly cover short demand peaks.
So how does the battery solve that flexibility problem?
By pairing them, the batteries can instantaneously inject or absorb power to manage that initial ramp-up. They provide that crucial short-duration support until the solid fuel plant reaches steady operation.
So the battery acts as a kind of temporary turbocharger and shock absorber for the solid fuel plant,
That's a perfect description.
which makes that slow, lumbering baseload plant suddenly capable of much faster, more system-responsive operation.
It smooths out the ramp-ups, it minimizes unnecessary cycling of the solid fuel units, and most importantly, it reduces reliance on expensive and constrained gas for that essential flexible peak capacity.
So this combination of deep geothermal, flexible hydro, coordinated fuel switching, secure gas storage, and this smart battery solid fuel pairing, that's the comprehensive blueprint for a firmed, stable, renewable system.
It's a whole-of-system approach.
We've covered the staggering scale of corporate consolidation and the immediate grid stability challenges faced by these high renewable systems. Now let's zoom out to the global stage and examine the inevitable and often hidden trade-offs that come with the clean transition. We're talking about geopolitics and the critical mineral supply chain.
This transition is fundamentally changing the nature of global resource competition. We're moving away from a world fighting over oil and gas pipelines toward a new high-stakes competition for access to foundational elements and the technology to process them.
And the nuclear sector is a perfect illustration of this shift. Central Asia, specifically Kazakhstan, is taking on a critical role.
It is. Kazakhstan is a uranium-rich state, and following a national referendum in October 2024 to expand its civilian nuclear sector, the geopolitical competition was instantaneous.
It was essentially a high-stakes energy auction involving the globe's major powers, wasn't it?
It was. Kazakhstan shortlisted major providers from Russia and China, alongside key Western allies like France and South Korea. The results, however, they heavily favored Astana's immediate neighbors and long-term partners.
So what were the results of those nuclear power plant deals?
Kazatomprom announced 3 new nuclear power plant deals. 2 of them went to international consortia led by China's CNNC, and 1 went to a consortium led by Russia's Rosatom.
So a very strong indicator of Chinese and Russian influence gaining significant traction in a vital Central Asian energy market.
A very strong indicator, yes.
That's a massive power play with really long-term implications for energy security. So what is the U.S. and the West's strategic interest in responding to that?
The U.S. has a clear strategic interest in counterbalancing this influence. The goal is to prevent Kazakhstan from becoming entirely dependent on Moscow and Beijing for its nuclear technology and its fuel cycle services.
And how are they doing that?
The research highlights the launch of new U.S.-Kazakhstan initiatives specifically designed to facilitate the deployment of small modular reactors, or SMRs.
Why SMRs specifically as the Western countermove, rather than trying to build another massive conventional plant?
Well, SMRs are smaller, they can be deployed faster, and they often require a smaller physical and capital footprint than the traditional massive nuclear plants.
Which makes them a more flexible tool.
A much more flexible tool for establishing a Western presence and offering diversification options to a state like Kazakhstan. It helps them avoid being locked into a single supplier relationship for decades. It's about offering a faster, less resource-intensive path to nuclear energy independence.
And this strategic urgency is being backed up by market movements in the nuclear fuel cycle itself. Uranium prices are rising, and the U.S. government is clearly trying to secure its domestic supply chain.
They are acting decisively. We saw the U.S. Department of Energy recently award $2.7 billion in funds specifically designated for high-assay low-enriched uranium HALEU and standard low-enriched uranium, or LEU, enrichment capacity.
$2.7 billion, that's a monumental investment.
It is, and it underscores the strategic importance of controlling the nuclear fuel cycle domestically. It's about ensuring energy independence and providing stable fuel for the next generation of reactors, particularly those SMRs.
It's a very clear signal. If you want to control your energy future, you have to control your fuel supply chain. Okay, let's pivot to the other major global trade-off of the clean transition. The profound social cost of clean technology, specifically lithium-ion batteries.
Which, ironically, are crucial for the grid firming solutions we just discussed in the New Zealand case study.
Exactly.
And this is where the risk fundamentally shifts.
Yeah.
We transition risk away from carbon emissions in the atmosphere to social and labor issues deep within the supply chain.
And the dedicated research team conducted detailed assessments on this, right?
They did. Life cycle assessments, or LCAs, and social life cycle assessments, SLCAs, on battery packs to provide this crucial perspective.
Let's first ground ourselves in the environmental footprint, the initial carbon cost of manufacturing the battery itself.
Okay. The LCA results indicate that the production phase of a typical lithium-ion battery pack generates between 77.2 and 80.7 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour.
So that's the embodied carbon.
That's the embodied carbon. It's a substantial initial footprint, which, though it's offset by zero-emission use later, it can't be ignored when you're calculating the true clean cost.
This is the pivot point. Let's look at the hidden social costs that were identified during the raw material extraction phase. This is where the analysis gets truly complex and concerning.
The SLCA results highlight significant and critical risks, and they're overwhelmingly concentrated during the upstream phase, the extraction of the foundational minerals.
So not in the factory or at the end of its life?
No. It's important to note that the use and end-of-life phases, which are often highly regulated in places like Europe and North America, showed no significant critical social impacts. The problem is far upstream, in the extraction and the processing.
So where are these critical social and labor risks concentrated in the battery supply chain?
We can break them down into 4 specific categories that were detailed in the research. First, fair pay and wages. The analysis noted significant risks here, primarily driven by substantial wage disparity issues in the mining sectors for cobalt in the Democratic Republic of the Congo,
Right.
manganese in South Africa, nickel in Australia, lithium also in Australia, and graphite in China.
And the second category?
Health and safety. High risks are directly associated with the extraction processes for cobalt, manganese, and nickel mining. These are dangerous extraction processes occurring in environments that often lack sufficient regulatory oversight and worker protection protocols.
That immediately suggests a kind of moral calculus is being applied here, doesn't it? We're reducing environmental risk in one country by accepting significant human cost risk in another. What about governance and workplace freedom?
The governance category is alarming. The research specifically flagged China, which exhibits the highest restriction score, a 9.1 on a 10-point scale regarding workplace organization.
A 9.1 on a 10-point scale.
Yeah.
That is staggering. What does that restriction really translate to on the ground for a worker involved in graphite processing?
It translates to minimal freedom for workers to organize, to voice their concerns, or to seek any kind of external oversight. It implies a highly controlled, state-influenced system where labor standards can be easily suppressed in the name of production efficiency.
So the product moves quickly to market, but at the expense of worker rights.
Often, yes.
And finally, the most severe category, forced labor.
The SLCA reported high values for forced labor specifically in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, and in Indonesia, linked directly to the sourcing and preliminary processing of battery materials.
This is the hard truth, then. The push for a cleaner grid means we are transferring the risk from carbon emissions to documented human rights and labor issues deep within the supply chains of these critical minerals.
And often in regions with high political instability and very weak regulatory enforcement.
So a truly sustainable transition requires us to look far beyond just the tailpipe emissions. The economic viability and the clean credentials of the final product, the electric vehicle or the grid storage unit, are built on this foundation of documented social risk at the raw material stage.
That is the essential conclusion. If we want this transition to be fundamentally ethical, we have to address the full life cycle, including these often hidden social costs in governance, safety, and labor.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the 55-gigawatt corporate giants focused on the AI boom to the specific engineering required to secure a highly renewable grid in a place like New Zealand.
And finally, to the geopolitical and social trade-offs of the supply chain.
Let's synthesize the core findings from Green Code, Hot Core. What are the 3 crucial takeaways you want our audience to walk away with today?
Okay, 3 things. First, the energy industry is being reorganized by the sheer scale of future demand. This demand, driven by the AI economy and advanced manufacturing, requires 247 power. And that's forcing industry to consolidate into these supergiants that can mix zero-carbon baseload like nuclear and geothermal with flexible assets.
Scale and diversity of firm capacity are now the price of entry for reliability.
Exactly. Second, the core challenge is system stability in highly renewable grids. The New Zealand case study clearly demonstrated that even a 90% clean system is uniquely vulnerable to volatility, driven by that marginal 10% of thermal fuel.
And the solution is an aggressive build-out.
Aggressive build-out, that 1.4 TWh per year, combined with sophisticated firming mechanisms like doubling gas storage and repurposing the hydro system to act like a massive flexible battery.
And the third takeaway.
And third is the fundamental shift in the risk profile. The transition is not risk-free. It just changes the type of risk you're taking on. It shifts away from carbon risk and dependence on OPEC oil to geopolitical competition over foundational materials. We saw that in the nuclear deals in Kazakhstan.
And significant social and labor issues in the critical mineral supply chain.
Precisely, especially regarding cobalt, lithium, and graphite extraction.
So what's the final provocative thought we should leave our listeners with today? Something that really encapsulates the tension of Green Code, Hot Core.
The next decade will not just be defined by how quickly we build renewables, but where we source the materials and, crucially, how we redesign our grids to make intermittent sources function like reliable 247 power. The solutions we discussed today, geothermal, advanced nuclear, secure LNG reserves, flexible hydro, they all point to the fact that the path to a resilient clean system often relies on securing stable, dispatchable power from reliable hot cores below the surface, or from secure, diverse fuel reserves to stabilize the whole system.
So the true challenge is bigger than just the technology.
The true complex challenge is building a clean system that is also fundamentally equitable and secure, from the mine where the materials are first sourced all the way to the meter on your wall.
That gives you plenty to mull over. We love hearing your thoughts. Whether you're on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, leave a comment and let us know what you think about Green Code. Hot Core are the social risks of critical minerals, a fair trade-off for emissions reduction.
And if you're finding this insightful, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Tomorrow Unveiled, and consider hitting that new hype button to help us reach more viewers. And of course, be sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an update on the future.
If you're listening on a podcast service like Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we'd be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a rating and review for Tomorrow Unveiled. It truly helps us reach new listeners. We'll see you next time on Tomorrow Unveiled.